Let's bring in Tom Ara. He's a partner and co-chair of the Entertainment, Finance and Transactions practice at DLA Piper in Los Angeles. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rochelle. Happy to be here.
So let's look at, because there's quite a range of comedians. So what are those with worldwide popularity versus, say, up-and-coming amateurs? What are they saying about how the pandemic has affected them and their career plans?
Well, as they say, there's no business like show business. But at the end of the day, comedy, like some other entertainment properties, is built on disposable income. And so as a consumer, you have to decide where you're going to spend your disposable income. And you're going to spend it on the top of everything, whether it's the best movies or the best comedians. And that certainly has trickled down to comedy clubs and comedians who are performing at venues that are the traditional venues. Of course, the reality is those venues, most of them have been closed because of the pandemic. And that's made things quite challenging.
Now, I want to talk about the material itself, because in addition to the pandemic, you have record unemployment. We're in the middle of all this social uprising about racial inequality, police brutality, issues that audiences may not be ready to joke about right now. How have these factors affected the kind of material they perform?
Well, that's a great question, but the reality is the social consciousness in comedy has not been a recent phenomenon. It dates back some years now, and we saw a number of comedians who faced criticism, some famous ones like Michael Richards, Louis C.K., Kathy Griffin, for doing certain things that felt outside of the norm. But as you state, the current environment in the world has heightened that sensitivity, and comedians who by their nature are bred to cross those social and racial and gender boundaries are now feeling some pushback. But what I will say is, I think more than anything, what has had the impact on bringing attention to these things has been technology. Telephones make it possible to record and show a comedian's performance at any venue, anywhere, at any time, even when they're testing out new material. And of course, that means anyone in the world can see it anytime.
So then, to that point, talk about some of the non-traditional ways we're seeing comedians really adapt to this new normal.
Sure. Again, technology plays a huge role in that. What we've seen in recent years actually is a comeback in the sense of live comedy shows and live comedy shows airing on television and on these subscription streaming services. So for some comedians who have gained popularity, these services have been looking to bring them on board to do specials. And that's certainly one way that some of these comedians have found an ability to tap some additional income outside of the traditional hitting the road, as they say. Of course, in this day and age, production has halted for the most part here in Hollywood.
Right.
And so even those live comedy shows that are being recorded for these services have seen their challenges. And I think most of these comedians have turned to social media platforms, YouTube and other online platforms to keep in touch with their audiences, test out new material, and of course, hopefully generate some income from advertisers.
Now, I know traditionally we tend to think of comedy as that one person we see before us on the stage, but obviously there are a lot of people doing the work behind the scenes. You have venue staff, bartenders, light and sound technicians, festival organizers, etc. Talk about the less visible jobs that are affected when comedy shows go dark and how they're faring.
Well, absolutely. And the reality is the same has been true in the film business. The actors are not the only ones who are suffering. It's everyone who is behind the scenes that makes a great show happen. And by the way, it even goes beyond that direct impact. Comedy clubs in particular are venues where alcohol is served in abundance often. And with the clubs being closed, it has had a meaningful impact on the sales of alcohol. So when you look at the ecosystem that is comedy and comedy circuit, it's broad and sweeping, and it definitely has had an economic impact that goes deep, deep, deep into our society.
And just quickly, I want to sort of look at what comedy shows are going to look like going forward. Dave Chappelle had, he had social distancing, he had people taking their temperatures. How is this going to shape the future of comedy and comedy shows?
Well, the reality is things will change, but we saw recently some comedy clubs that had opened back up in some of the states here in the United States. Two comedians contracted COVID-19. Unfortunately, there was sharing of microphones and large crowds. Those things will have to, in the interim, be controlled very strictly because this outbreak has to end. But in reality, we need comedy now more than ever, and we need to laugh considering everything that is going on in the world. And so what will eventually happen there will be strict controls and limitations on crowds. There may have to be remote type performances that are then broadcast, but it will come back.
Right.
And one of my favorite sayings, George Burns said, look to the future, as that is where you will spend the rest of your life. And I think that will be the case for us. We're going to have to see how that plays out.